All right, so let's jump right in. Picture this. It's the end of the 20th century, and two really huge ideas about liberal democracy are floating around. One basically says, we're done. History has reached its final stop. The other is way more fundamental, asking, okay, how do we even build a just society to begin with? So today, we're going to unpack both of them. I mean, can you imagine? It's 1989. The Berlin Wall is literally crumbling, and someone tells you, this is it, it's over. Not just the Cold War, but history itself. Not like, stuff stops happening, but the big epic battles of ideas that have shaped everything. Done. That was the bombshell argument from a guy named Francis Fukuyama.
So let's start there, with the end of history. This is Francis Fukuyama's big idea. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some hot take on the Cold War ending. No, this was a massive, sweeping philosophical claim about where humanity itself was headed.
And here's the heart of his argument right here. Fukuyama looked at the fall of communism and said, this isn't just another political domino falling. He saw it as the ultimate knockout punch, the final victory for the idea of liberal democracy, like game over. There were no serious challengers left in the ring. Now, to really get this, you have to know what he meant by history. He was borrowing from the philosopher Hegel, and the idea is that history isn't just, one thing after another. The real battle, the main event, happens in the world of ideas. And once an idea wins there, in our minds, the physical world, the politics, the economics, it eventually just catches up. And you can see his logic play out right here. It's like, okay, the French Revolution kicks things off, setting the goalposts, liberty and equality. Then a huge competitor, fascism, gets knocked out of the running in World War II. And then finally, the last major alternative, Soviet communism, just crumbles. For Fukuyama, that was it. Checkmate.
So there you have it. This was the champion, the last one standing. And you can really feel that intense optimism of the early 90s here, right? He was basically saying that liberal democracy wasn't just another flavor of government. Nope, it was the final form of human government, the end of the line for our ideological evolution. Wow.
Pretty triumphant vision, huh? But as you can probably guess, not everyone was buying it. In fact, pretty much right away, the criticisms started pouring in. People started asking, hey, hold on a second. In the middle of this victory lap, did we maybe overlook a few things?
Which brings us to the other side of the coin, the unresolved contradictions. The critics weren't just saying Fukuyama got it wrong. Their argument was that he was looking at the entire world through a very specific and maybe kind of narrow peephole. Take journalist Jonathan Steele, for instance. He basically called it out as being super Americocentric. Like, what about the massive poverty in the global south? What about ecological collapse? Or, the fact that we can still blow ourselves up with nukes. These are huge historical forces that were absolutely not resolved.
And then you have Edward Mortimer, who made another brilliant point. He said that things like nationalism and religious fundamentalism, they aren't just external enemies banging on the door. A lot of the time, they're contradictions that grow right inside liberal societies, sprouting from things like inequality or a feeling that people have lost their sense of identity.
So, okay, if liberalism clearly hadn't solved everything, then maybe the goal shouldn't be to just declare mission accomplished. Maybe the real work is figuring out how to make the whole system actually fair. And that question, it shifts us from talking about the destination to talking about the journey, the how we get there.
And this is the perfect place to bring in our second thinker, the philosopher John Rawls. See, he wasn't interested in grand pronouncements about the end of history. He was obsessed with a much more practical and maybe more difficult problem right at the core of any democracy. How in the world do we build a just, stable society when all of us, the citizens, believe in completely different, often clashing things?
His big project was called Justice as Fairness. And the key here is that he wasn't trying to find some ultimate capital T truth about the meaning of life that everyone had to sign up for. No way. He was looking for a shared political rulebook, a framework that people with totally different philosophies could all look at and say, yeah, okay, I can live with that.
The goal he was aiming for is something called an overlapping consensus. It's a great phrase. Think of it like a Venn diagram. You might have a religious person, an atheist, and a hardcore capitalist who all agree that, say, freedom of speech is essential. They agree on the principle for completely different reasons rooted in their own beliefs. But that little slice where they all overlap, that's the sweet spot. That's the foundation for a stable and just society.
So, that sounds great, but how do you actually find that consensus? Rawls was no fool. He knew that in the real world, people with power tend to make the rules that, surprise, surprise, help them keep that power. So, to get around that fundamental human bias, he came up with this really elegant thought experiment.
It's called the original position. Here's how it works. Imagine you and a bunch of other people get to design society from scratch. The catch? You have to do it from behind a veil of ignorance. That means you have no idea who you're going to be in that society. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor, what your talents will be, what religion you'll follow, nothing. So what kind of society would you design then? Well, you'd probably design one that's as fair as possible for everyone, right? Because you might end up being the person at the very bottom.
And Rawls argued that from that perfectly fair starting point, we'd all agree on two fundamental principles. Principle 1, everybody gets the most extensive set of basic rights and liberties possible, and everyone's set has to be equal, can't be touched. Principle 2 is the interesting one. It says social and economic inequalities are okay, but only if they meet two conditions. They have to be attached to jobs open to everyone, and, crucially, they have to be set up to give the greatest possible benefit to the people who are worst off in society.
Okay, and this next point is absolutely key to understanding Rawls' whole vision. It's a really important distinction, and it's what makes his theory so useful for a messy, modern, pluralistic society.
Rawls was adamant that his idea was political, not metaphysical. What's the difference? Well, a metaphysical system tries to tell you the ultimate truth about the universe, about morality, about the nature of the self. Rawls says, nope, not doing that. A political conception just stays on the surface. It's not trying to solve the deepest mysteries of life. It's trying to create a practical, public set of rules so that people who have wildly different answers to those mysteries can still live together and cooperate fairly. It's a genius move, really. It's basically extending the idea of religious tolerance to philosophy itself.
So when you put these two visions next to each other, the contrast is really stark. You've got Francis Fukuyama basically planting a flag and declaring, "We're here. This is the destination." And then you have John Rawls, who's not focused on the destination at all. He's handing us the blueprints and the tools and saying, okay, here's how we can build a fair road together, knowing full well that the building never really stops.
And that really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Is it just society, a destination we finally reached, something to be celebrated like Fukuyama suggested? Or is it more like what Rawls proposed, a constant, ongoing project, something we have to get up and build and rebuild every single day? It's a question we're thinking about.